into it, but now having been part of the day, I feel like actually, yeah, definitely part of this healthcare ecosystem. The ethics apply to me as well as an engineer, not just medical practitioners. Yeah, so super excited to have our panelists here. And there's a new panelist, so welcome. Yeah, so before you head into your workshop, to imagine what the future of healthcare education could look like, let's hear from some of our panelists who are passionate about this area, who have active projects and lots of ideas already. So let's get into it. So welcome panelists, and let's start with your intros. Would you each introduce yourself, right? Your role, so what you work on, the role of AI in your work, and in one sentence answering the following. How do you see your role and the role of your team changing in the next 10 years, either as a physician, as a medical educator, or as a health policy influencer, whatever your perspective is. Maybe we could, I guess we haven't met, so maybe we should start with you, Ms. Taz. And you haven't seen the questions that are already prepared, so this will be great.
It's working already.
Oh, it's working. Okay, fantastic. Well, hello everyone. I'm really thankful to be here. This is an opportunity as a panelist. We were talking about disruptive technologies. Each one of you is a disruptive technology in the sense that you create, you challenge, you bring with you. And so my background is actually in the nonprofit and community engagement fields, and I'm very lucky. I'm fortunate. I was born in El Salvador. I grew up in Cambridge. We were escaping remnants of the Civil War and atrocities in El Salvador. Cambridge became my home, an opportunity for a better education, for medical fields, or medical education, as an opportunity to thrive. So I bring with me today all of my art teachers. I bring with me today all my friends who were allowed to fail. I bring my friends who are successful and are working and can't be here today. I bring my teachers, my mentors. I went to Cambridge Latin. I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York. I didn't even know it was in upstate New York. Didn't know I wanted to go to Northeastern or University of Chicago. And I got an opportunity to change my perspective by going to school in upstate New York. Got educated at BU, but none of that matters. Because if I'm not doing something to connect with people, to bring back to my community, then, what am I really doing with my life, my purpose? I bring my mom with me, my grandmother. I bring Leo with me everywhere I go. And I'm so thankful to be here and be in this space where I'm able to share my knowledge with the elders that I met my entire life with you today. So thank you so much for having me.
Hi everyone, my name is Maya Moon. I'm a professor of obstetrics and gynecology at the University of Michigan, where I also I'm the chief of women's health there, and I'm also in charge of AI initiatives in our department. And on a national level, I've been working with the American Medical Association as a consultant with the Med unit. And as I think about AI, what it's going to do, I do think even my own role, I started with, the physicians in the room here, I'm older, whether you ever saw paper charts or not. We used to take this whole bunch of paper charts home to work on them. So I've been seeing a lot of changes throughout, right? So the electronic health record, and now how I deal with my patients, I use ambient, I just sit and I listen to them, and their ambient is capturing everything. And as I think about the future, it absolutely is going to continue to change. And we know now, even when I deal with my patients, I'm also using open evidence to answer their questions. I put it in there, how do I say to the patient? And it's much nicer than I could ever be. So my patients now send me notes like, you're so kind for taking the time to do this. And I am taking the time to put it in the, but it is actually much, much better. So it's like, how do it is making my job a lot better today. But I also wonder about, I think of some of I have 3 daughters, they're adult now, but one of them will do everything to avoid calling somebody on the phone. Because she wants to do everything online, she wants to do it, she doesn't want to talk to a real person. So we don't know as if we want to meet the patient's demand, some of them are going to be more comfortable with AI. And I can tell you, AI is a lot smarter diagnostician than we are if you use it in the right place. Because if you think about how we diagnose, we go look up the literature, we put things together, we do pattern recognition. If you divide up the competencies that we have as a physician in terms of knowledge and in terms of synthesizing, AI can definitely do that better. But the part that I always say, AI cannot hold your hand. AI cannot sit and actually, if a patient had a miscarriage, explain to her what that is and what does it mean. It could, but it's not the same as that human interaction. While we've always really appreciated, and we still do that today, and that has to change. I've been saying that for way before AI came. For over 15 years, I've been saying we do closed book exams, people memorize. What we value is walking encyclopedias. While we are not, AI is much better than us at that. So we have to recognize what are the basic things that we need to know in order to do our job effectively and make those the competencies required of doctors as synthesizers, as communicators. And people say, well, AI can also have empathy. AI cannot, does not have the morale and the trust that we will have with our patients. And I don't think that will ever be replaced. And as we think of the future, we have to think what are those added values that we bring as human beings to our job, but it absolutely is going to change.
I think I have this. Can you hear me with this? That's great. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Kim Lomas. I'm with the American Medical Association, and I want to start first by thanking all of you. It's a really a privilege today to work with you and your team, this army of people that you have that you work with to set this up, and so we're very appreciative. And I've been trying today to listen more than speak, and hopefully I'm pulling that off until this moment. But first of all, I just want to thank you for opening my mind and helping us to think about how we would do our work differently. So prior to my current role at the AMA, I was professor of surgery and associate dean at Vanderbilt School of Medicine. But I've now been with the AMA for about 7 years as vice president for medical education and innovation. What that actually means is that I work with medical schools and residency programs across the country and increasingly internationally to think about educating differently. So not so much about content, but how we do it. And so we've got partners everywhere. Several are in the room that we have funded and supported through a variety of initiatives. So when I think about how that work might change in the next 10 years, I'm hopeful that we can push the envelope around process even further. I think AI gives us the opportunity to better integrate learning with working. And heck, you mentioned purpose. So I had a somewhat disquieting conversation with a junior faculty member at Harvard yesterday that I was visiting since I was here in the city. And we were discussing the fact that now residents often feel disconnected from the work and the patients, and they view residency as something that's being imposed upon them. And this was a young faculty member telling myself and another senior woman surgeon that their life was hard, which, yeah, okay. But we reflected that even though our work was so hard, we knew we were making a difference every day. We were directly interacting with patients. We were filled with purpose, and we leaned on one another in a way that I think that the workflow has changed. And so the learners feel disconnected from their purpose, even as a resident, when you're actually rendering care. I could see it as a student. So I'm optimistic. Can we use AI to enable people to have more autonomy at every step of their development, so they feel like they can be actively contributing to the work and learning in the process? I saw one cool AI example of this from the world of psychology, which was a text-based peer counseling program in which students in college were learning how to identify peers who needed more significant counseling. And because of the not wanting to speak to anybody in person, this was an entirely text-based platform where the seeker of care would text the peer counselor and say how they're feeling. And what this team did was they inserted an AI chatbot in the middle. So the seeker makes a statement, the learning counselor takes their first pass at writing out their response. And then the chatbot comes in and says, bless your heart, you might not want to say it like that. Maybe take this part out, consider inserting this. And so in real time, giving some guidance and some coaching so that the learner can still be filling the role but learning as they do the work. And that's the kind of example that really intrigues me. And so I hope within 10 years, actually, I'm not working with medical schools the way we envision them now. I hope I'm working with health systems that are training people who are actively working and contributing. I hope we can really redesign the whole process and break away from the current steps that we have so that we make this a little bit more fluid and continuous. And that's very idealistic, but that's where I would hope we could be in 10 years, or at least trying it. We won't have fully converted it for sure.
So nice to meet you all. I'm Sean. I think everyone, yeah, I can hear me. Okay. I'm Sean from the University of British Columbia, from Vancouver, Canada. The part that I'm most excited to be working on right now is a book that's called Medical AI, Promises and Perils at a Critical Moment. And what I'm worried about in that book is that I worry that we have an opportunity to shape the workflow such that AI is augmenting humanity, augmenting human physicians. But I worry that in the current framing, the efficiency paradigm, that I worry we will see AI replacing human doctors. Certainly there's a problem of inaccessibility. AI is filling that niche. It's doing a good job. Increasing empirical evidence is saying when you add humans to really powerful AI, humans not adding much. This is shown now by 2 meta-analysis. So if AI can do a job, the current framing of physician's job better at a lower cost, then I worry about that. But the original question that I prepared for was, what is exciting? So what is exciting is that we have a chance to change that. And there's a chance to change that in terms of how we actually use it, in terms of shaping the workflow. And there's also a chance that if we do it right, we can actually influence the equity, which is what we're going to be talking about, I think. And I think that's very exciting. I think it's very important that we get it right, but we might only get one chance.
Okay, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts already about the future. Let's come back to the present a little bit. So when using AI in healthcare delivery today or in the near future, whether you're applying to medical education or delivery, so it's important to understand the limitations. So one such limitation is the knowledge or value that it is encoded in these systems. So let's dig into that. And I would start with Sean. Maybe after you can go next, we can have some thoughts and some time to think about it. Unfair, other panelists have had a chance to prepare these questions. So Sean, so first to you, what values, knowledge gets encoded in these systems? And if AI is trained today on today's healthcare data, what's left out? What is it inevitably learning, and what's the downstream effects? A lot packed in that question.
Yeah, there's a lot. So I'll start with the less exciting part, which is talking about the historical up and now, the data problem, which is, when we're talking about knowledge, norms, preferences that's encoded, that there's actually the data. And guess whose data is available? It's the people who have been able to access healthcare services, have that data recorded, and have that process for AI. Maybe it's healthcare services finding them more profitable to work with, maybe it's more convenient to work with, regardless, tends to be the wealthier people, right? And tends to be that kind of preference, the one that's being embedded. I don't think that's surprising to most of us here. The part that is, I think, a bit more worrisome is where it goes from here. And I see 2 directions that might happen. One direction is the perpetuation of the norm, of the direction that physics thrives. So I'm not going to talk about that again. The part that worries me is a new burgeoning phenomenon where the people who have been traditionally marginalized, they're now turning to AI for healthcare services. We see ChatGPT offering services, et cetera, right? And certainly that is offering value to these people. So they're actually interacting with these services. The downstream harm, one, is that they might be taking advice from these services. And there was statistics that was coming out from last year around August looking at Americans. And about 22% of Americans have already suffered harm from medical advice that they got from AI chatbot. And about 1/3 of Americans are willing to engage AI chatbot for medical advice, prescriptions, if it saves them costs from having to interact with medical doctors. So that's happening, right? The second part that is downstream is that, hey, you know what? We were originally talking about the knowledge that gets embedded, the knowledge norm preferences. When the marginalized group actually interacts with their chatbot, that actually allows them on some level to mitigate the knowledge problem, right? The knowledge norm problem. But along the way, what it does is that it improves the value of these AI chatbots, which allows the AI companies to charge a pretty penny for it. And if they're going to charge a pretty penny for it, hospitals are going to charge more, insurance may charge more, pricing out some of these marginalized populations from actually benefiting from the improved quality of AI chatbots. So what I worry about for this second direction is that the marginalized population that have actually contributed data, norms, preferences, that is theoretically improving the AI, ends up actually getting priced out of an AI that they helped train. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Sister Rose and I were talking earlier about the hubris of humanity, right? That oftentimes when we are working with these AI models, we want to recreate, right? Recreate often to be like God or even better than God, because our hubris, right? And so what values are being encoded are the values from the encoder. Where did the encoder come from? What communities? What are their own ethics and moral compass, right? Justice and ethics is not something that we can just cherry pick based on what benefits us. It's either just or it's not just, right? But oftentimes with these models, if the data sets that they're receiving are based on one sector of the population and not including or not even adding to the question that we need to start from ground one and help educate those whose voices are often left out. If we're not studying why there's a huge distrust in the communities of color and underrepresented communities of color with doctors and nurses in the medical field, then that data set is already skewed and those values have already changed, right? And so the challenge for you is to go home and be courageous enough to plant seeds and trees knowing that you will never sit and enjoy their shade, because that's the value of the encoder that we should be fundamentally asking ourselves and encouraging others.
Thanks for that. So now turning to a little deeper into medical education. So Ken and Maya, what kind of knowledge is most likely being excluded from medical education? What maybe like the main knowledge?
Yeah, so when we think about medical education, that same hubris, we have a long legacy of thinking we know how to train people to be good physicians. And that is based on a role in which we were the stewards of knowledge. And so if you look at the value system expressed currently by our medical education system, it is heavily anchored in one's ability to hold knowledge and regurgitate it. That's not going to be the successful person in the future. AI can do that role. And so redefining what our role is also means redefining which competencies we emphasize and elevate. And the way we assess our learners is our expression of our values. And right now that assessment stays heavily anchored in that knowledge base. Many places are innovating and creating more active learning formats in which there's a lot more attention to the process of inquiry and critical appraisal and discussion and application. But really when it comes down to it, there's still an emphasis on knowledge because it's easier to measure for us as assessors than so many other domains that are equally important. And so I'm excited to think that with AI and with the data that we'll have, that we'll be able to make a case for the importance of these other domains. We've described them, we say they're important, but we haven't really emphasized them. So communication skills, professionalism, the things that have been coming up today will become more and more important. And I'm hopeful if we use these tools well, it will allow us to elevate their value in our system.
we say that we know that knowledge now takes about 70. When I went to medical school, I remember the associate dean at the beginning of the first day of medical school stood there and said, "What we're going to teach you today, by the time you're done, 50% is going to be old and absolute, but I can't tell you which part, so you need to learn all of it." And that was that's disappointing. And now that knowledge is changing every 73 days. So over 10 years ago, the AMA put together the health system science as the third pillar about the delivery of healthcare, about how we look at everything else surrounding healthcare besides the basic and the clinical sciences. And now we're in we're writing the third edition of that book. Even though I don't know that students read books anymore, we need to think about that too. But some of us who teach still read the books. So the last chapter, we're trying to think about what does the position of the future need. And Kevin Heckman from there, I've had this conversation for a long time, like, give me somebody who's a master adaptive learner and a system thinker, and I'm good. And then because these people will know what they need to learn, and also they're thinking about the entire system, right? Because they need to be thinking about everything. So they will recognize AI is here, I need to go learn it because I need to change. And we often talk about how we're choosing the wrong people to enter medical school because we're still choosing those people based on the encyclopedias and what their ability to memorize, even though what they memorize is none of it is going to be relevant by the time they get to practicing medicine. And I don't know why we still don't change our admissions. And I really hope what you're saying, Kim, is AI can help us actually measure these other competencies in different ways. That because I think we measure what's easy to measure, and this is why we choose based on that, because it's an easy way to go. But how do we actually choose the right people who are going to be those physicians who are going to be adapting, who are going to be system thinkers, who are going to understand that the way that we do medicine changes. And we also at the same time, we say it takes 17 years for a doctor to change their practice. It's because we taught them that. We taught them to memorize in medical school. So why should they go look something up? So we need to really think our own education system about who we choose. And the part that I find the most frustrating is every single educator tells you that, but nobody makes a change. And it's got to start somewhere.
But just to add one dimension. So you brought up master adaptive learner systems thinker, and then reflecting on the earlier sessions, we were talking at lunch about altruism, which kind of comes over to should they already have ethics grounding before they learn bioethics on top of it. And I do think that thinking about the more community-oriented cultures, the individualism in the U.S. culture in particular is manifest in the learner as well. I mean, education theoretically is to develop this workforce, but most people aren't thinking that. They're thinking about my career path, my opportunities. And so that is another dimension that, and there are we have so many wonderful young people in medicine now. I'm not disparaging them across the board, but there are some who are there for the wrong reasons, often societal pressures from even their own families and others. So this notion of thinking more about how do we get the folks who really are committed to others as another dimension that we have a really hard time measuring.
So this is going to sound really crazy, but hear me out. All right, hear me out. Be an active unlearner. We're learning and then unlearning, whether it is a mentality, a system, constantly be active unlearners. Sounds crazy, right? But we're always going to be lifelong learners. Once we reach a certain age or a certain position, then we know, right? We have the experience, right? But the idea is that it's no longer access to knowledge. I can go on WebMD and I'm a doctor. Now I will misdiagnose myself, but I can go on YouTube. I can be a plumber. I'm not going to be a good plumber, right? But the idea is that it's more access to these spaces so that we can share, right? Generational wealth isn't just a financial model. Generational wealth is the lessons, the things, the values that you pass down from one generation to another, right? And if anybody needs a good plumber, I got a guy, let me know.
Right, I have to reflect on what I should unlearn. All right, cool. So let's shift our attention a little bit maybe back to the future. You talked about like some of the limitations of systems today. But let's look at the future for medical education. Is the potential of AI maybe to help us address some of the inequities that exist, maybe imposed by geography, economics, social circumstances. Like maybe start with Wyatt. Hector, welcome to add as well. Curious if you could just stand in the place of envision for a moment for medical education. What is the potential? What could good look like that help us and then help us understand maybe how to get there.
Oftentimes people, when they talk AI, they talk about the bias. And one of the earlier panels talked about the bias in maternal mortality and maternal health. And if we already know that there are these different outcomes, why are we not able to address them? And it's just very frustrating because we know that there are differences. And I tell you, it's a shame for me, for the longest time, we have this C-section calculator that we use that actually had race in it, that I don't even know, we don't even question it, we just use it. And it actually was making worse outcomes because it should not have been in there in the first place, so it finally came out. But oftentimes we don't question, we just learn and we just keep moving. And I do think that, I'm like Sean, I like to see the opportunity in things. Just like the data that goes in has bias and we have to really question that. Also, we kind of throw around this term, it's not a real term, but called reflective analytics instead of predictive analytics. You can actually look at your data backwards and you can see was I actually being picking at certain things, or what you can reflect on your data and analyzing it and actually seeing where there was bias in that data. And I do think that AI could potentially help us with that if we learn how to ask the right questions. And that's why I think when you talk about competencies for the future, not everyone interacts with, I see within my own faculty, not everyone interacts with ChatGPT the same way, and you get very different answers depending on what you put your prompt in. So I do think this is going to be really important because we need to make sure the bias and the ethics are addressed up front because we don't want to miss that opportunity.
Hector, still,
I've been.
Yeah, you're typing.
I'm like that Kermit the Frog meme. Just typing. I love that you mentioned Back to the Future because if you've never seen the movie Back to the Future, please do, and I'll tell you why. What makes time travel happen is the flux capacitor, right? The flux capacitor is a triangle, right? And the reason why I say this is because groups of threes, you are able to impact groups of threes. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, it's much harder to make real impacts. I say this because we are all frequencies, right? Find your tribe, find your folks, but also find the folks that you are in frequency with, because they will challenge you and you will challenge them to get better in a space where it's thoughtful, it's open, it's accepting and warm. I worked at Apple for many years, and all of our knowledge and training was based on competencies. So if you think of what competencies you're missing or you would like to be better at, find those who you aren't in frequency with.
Thank you. All right, so I want to also have Kim chime in on how do we get to that future state? What are drawing maybe on some work that you do?
So we think about it from two lenses. So we addressed a little bit about health inequities, but then also we have a lot of inequity embedded in our educational structures and processes. And so I think that there's opportunities to use AI to allow more learners to see themselves as physicians and to feel validated early in their training process. Again, if we emphasize too much on just one domain of competency of knowledge, and that's an area that you are struggling with perhaps early in school because you haven't had as much preparation as some people with greater privilege around you have had, then you feel like an imposter. But what we found as we work on competency-based education and providing richer data about more dimensions of performance, you can validate that same individual because they're really good at something else. And so now they're valued and they belong because they can communicate, they connect with people in a way that maybe the book smart person can't come close to. And so I think that the richer data that we have the potential to provide also means that it's really hard to meet all of the domains of competency that are expected of a physician. No one can do that. So it would normalize things that we're all working on some things and we all have ways to improve, and we could bring in more people and enrich the groups that we have as trainees. When we think about using AI to improve the process of education, so these new grants that we alluded to earlier, one of them is, I'm really intrigued at its potential to address equity on both levels, for both the health outcomes as well as the learners. This is a project in collaboration with the Georgia Academy of Family Practice, and it's focused on rural healthcare in Georgia, which among the US states, it's among the lowest for health outcomes. And so this is a network of family medicine residency programs across the state that are going to be using AI tools to mine local community outcome data to provide individual residents coaching about their own development. So really linking my day-to-day learning and my focus of my education to how my patients are doing in my area. And that's something we just would never have been capable of really making that, especially in any kind of real-time way in the past. So there are some exciting opportunities for sure.
That's awesome. All right, so just for time, I'm gonna shift back to inequities in healthcare delivery. So when algorithms increasingly guide clinical decisions, how do we ensure AI serves community powered by healthcare inequities rather than amplifying disparities? So Sean, we're starting with you, and then I'll ask Hector too, just to prepare you. So for Sean, how can we structure health system? Let's take a health system point of view. How can we structure health systems? How is AI affecting health systems today, and how do we educate future clinicians in the use of AI? And for Hector, if you maybe think about what would you want medical educators and policymakers to consider, to not forget, what not to forget, what again, linking back to some of what.
I think to talk about all aspects of health system is a tall order. So what I have thought about is, if I could narrow down one problem, what would it be? And I think the fundamental problem is that most healthcare systems, most of the time, focus on efficiency instead of equity. And you can see that in terms of the various behaviors and various actors and various incentives. So for example, patients, you want more affordability at a lower cost, right? You want better quality care. Hospital, healthcare service providers, you want higher efficiency, higher quality. Insurance, you want more efficiency, more quality. Now, none of those by itself really drives equity, right? So in the current interest-based focus, it's really driving efficiency and not necessarily equity. So if we take a step back then, I think the question then is, well, why is equity even important in the first place? I think you can answer this on two levels. And I think earlier in panel 2, there was an instrumental argument to be made. Well, equity is good because it helps the overall society to feel healthier, right? You can make an economic argument to say, hey, you know what, equity, if you develop the society equitably, it means that the people who are not currently having the opportunity, they get a bigger boost of opportunities. The people who have had the opportunity, they have diminishing marginal gains. The people who haven't had it, much larger gain, and they would do better. You can make those arguments on an instrumental level. I don't think that is the problem. I think even if you have those evidence to make that argument on an instrumental level, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is people don't like the idea that people who have had less advantage deserves more help. I think that's the fundamental problem. But again, I was reflecting on this, and I actually still don't think that's a pure problem, because if you ask anybody who, I should say that, 98% of the people probably, hey, if you had suffered, if you had hard times following you, do you believe you deserve help? Well, people are like, yeah, hello. If it's your kid, it's like, yeah, I would help my kid, right? If it's your cousin, yeah. If it's a cousin you're distant from, we gotta start talking about that, okay? If it's a stranger on the street, now I really am not sure I want to help that person, or I feel that person deserves help for disadvantages. So the problem around whether or not equity is something that is advisable or liked really comes down to how much do people see the other person as relevant to their social circle. The bigger your social circle, the more focus you put on equity, right? So, and in our current society, I'm afraid, we have a pretty small bubble of who we consider to be relevant for that we should care about, right? But the promising part in terms of the potential opportunities that I see is that there has been times where things have really changed. And historically, in the United Kingdom, United Kingdom actually, my personal appreciation is that there is some historical hierarchy, all right? But they pushed through in 1940s the national health insurance, right? 1940s, 1950s. National health insurance allows the really wealthy people of the society to cross-subsidize the really poor people of the society. And that goes against the idea of their original social fabric. Why did that happen? Because after World War I, everybody got struck by war. Everybody's like, oh man, this sucks. My neighbor and I both suffer, right? And you know what? We overcame the challenges that face us as a nation. We're in this together. So the problem then is solved because of sense of social solidarity, right? And I think somebody earlier today said, oh, what is the biggest problem? And the person said, yeah, the lack of connection. And I would agree with that. I think fundamentally the problem is if you can, the reason why I think healthcare AI is allowed to have inequitable outcomes is because people do not necessarily believe we need to solve this together as a community. If we do believe we can solve this together as a community, and we need to, then there's going to be changes. And then we can talk about, okay, once we actually meaningfully all buy into this idea of equity and social solidarity, that AI harm for person X is AI harm that could happen to my cousin, my children, okay, then we're going to be really having a force to be reckoned with, right? I think that is probably the hardest problem to solve. Once we solve that people have meaningful agreement with equity, that we do believe we need to solve this together, and that an insult from AI chatbot on the weakest of us is an insult on the best of us, then we can start to address how are we going to select the medical student, how are we going to train the medical student, how are we going to pay them, right? I think the focus, for example, in the Georgia grant, that's an excellent direction. And that is an example of a policy that we can move forward. And I think that can go concurrently with increased social dialogue around how we can foster increased social solidarity around AI and equity. Yeah. AI and AI. You get it.
Hopefully events like this help us make a small step in building even more connection or even play as a community.
That was wonderfully powerful. Thank you. I was thinking the same thing. 2.5 years ago, I almost lost my grandmother. One day I dropped her off at Israel in the emergency room thinking it was going to be a quick procedure. It took 12 hours to get to bed. We spent 97 days in the hospital, 8 weeks, 4 days in the ICU, 3 family meetings when they said there's nothing more that we can do. So what I would love for folks to remember is to advocate, advocate, and advocate. Not just for you, but because one day it could be somebody that you love, or that you learn to love that you've never met. I would love folks to remember that I am because we are. And that's the fundamental change in mentality, not only just in medicine, but in our communities. That oftentimes we're rushing to get an answer to fix something. That particularly of color are less listened to than a white woman. I remember being in the ICU in the hospital when my grandmother was telling them that she was suffering and she was dying. And all they said was, well, look at the numbers. Look at the numbers, she's fine. You almost lost her, and that evening she was intubated. That is one of the worst feelings you could ever have, being called. You're on your way to work, and they tell you, come here, call everybody, because you have to say goodbyes. And so that moment changed my life significantly in the sense that I joined the hospital-wide Hospice Family Council at Beth Israel because I knew that there were voices that I heard in the ICU, the cries, the screams of family members that were lost. And I knew that I needed to take up that mantle and speak up for those who weren't there. So that's what I would love folks to remember and take away.
Thank you so much.
And so, can I,
So let's close this out with your comments, how you see reaction or how you see AI under.
First, thank you for sharing that powerful story, and I think it connects to, you talked about the focus on efficiency. And I think that in addition to your concern about efficiency over equity, I don't think we even think about efficiency properly. The efficiency is, I'm thinking about the last section when we were pushed to think about the long game. And that is not what our systems do when they think efficiency. They are operating on very short-term goals. So when efficiency means that a learner doesn't participate because it would slow things down, that learner is going to be less prepared downstream and they will slow things down. Or perhaps make mistakes, or not take the time to talk to a family. And so I think that we need to get, in addition to thinking about elevating equity, we need to help folks think a little bit more discriminatingly about what it means to be efficient or productive in our system. So that we can build in space and time for learning, particularly if we're incorporating AI tools we don't know how to use yet. We got to have a little breathing room and some white space to work on those.
Great. Any last comment, reaction from the panelists?
I would just say one more. I think privilege isn't bad. It's all about how we use it. And I come from an abundance of privilege. You see these buildings and this land was a part of an indigenous community. And these buildings were not here. I saw these buildings fall. I've seen these buildings rise. I've worked with the city council to make sure these buildings get here, right? So when we think about privilege, we think about making sure that whatever model you're working on, whether it's a proposal, a code, right, that we are future-proofing it in the sense. Because we'll be gone, right? But what essence of your stuff did you leave in your code and your workshop and your class? That I think is essential.
I just want to say I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic that the groups like this, who all get together, thank you, Leo, for bringing us here, to talk about this, to actually see each other's perspective, to think about it, and to go back and have the agency and the leadership to actually do something about it. So as long as, and I'm actually also optimistic with our new generation, that hopefully we're going to bring them right so they can take care of us when we're really older.
Well, thank you, all of you, and hopefully that inspires and sparks ideas as you go to the third workshop. Thank you,